Cultural collaboration. I've never heard the term before.
I have no idea.
I think of like race and diversity, probably.
Like some sort of creative project, like maybe music or film or something along those lines.
Maybe art. Music comes to mind quickly because I feel like that happens a lot.
Those words would imply something in the arts more. Yeah.
There are also like certain like scientific projects where like people work on universities all around the world. You know, it's not necessarily
L'ADN qu'on a extrait soit bien coloré en vert, malgré le rinçage.
Monsieur, vous avez le projet de brevet?
Oui, mais...
My name is Oressa Gray-Mullen, and I'm the class of 2020. My major is communications. I'm also pursuing the film studies certificate and a minor in education. The plan is to spend a semester in Hong Kong shooting my documentary.
Hong Kong, first of all, we're a global city. We've been working with multicultural practices.
Some of the worst violence since the protests began 5 months ago. This was the scene outside the Chinese university. Students setting up barricades in surrounding streets, at least one car set on fire.
The campus in the Chinese university in Hong Kong has become a small battleground between protesters and police, and doesn't feel that the students staying there are safe.
So my name is Ibrahim Tahoun. I'm a senior computer engineering major at UMass. I was born in Egypt and I lived there for a couple of years, and then my family moved to France and then Malaysia for a couple of years, Japan for a year and a half, and then I ended up staying at Malaysia for like for the remainder of my schooling. Kind of like the common ground between everything was like I did get to go to international schools when I traveled. When I came back, my parents found that it was like easier if we kept moving to be in an international curriculum.
So my name is Dina Srouji, and I am the IB coordinator for the IB diploma, and I'm also an IB biology teacher. I graduated high school from Kuwait, and in Middle East, you know, it's very well known that science and math is very strong. And back home, back in Middle East, so my science was, I want to say like it was very strong, and I had a very strong background. So when I came here to look at the curriculum, the International Baccalaureate, the IB, was the closest to the rigorousness that I'm used to.
My name is Ahmad. I went to school in Jordan, in Amman, which is like the capital. It's in the Middle East, Amman, Jordan. Now I go to UMass, I'm a junior, I study kinesiology, and I'm on the pre-med track. And I did like the full IB diploma program. Taught like the 6 core subjects, and then like the TOK, the extended essay, and like the community service and all that. Honestly, like the challenges in the program itself, just like how it's structured, how rigid and strict it is. Like I feel like there's a lot of work to it. You have to know the subject inside out, like in very great depth.
It was like a very like strict system, but it was expected of the students, given that like that the teachers put a lot of effort into it as well.
I'm Katie Brown, and I teach middle school science. I would say that the piece about the middle years program in the IB that is the most different from any other school that I've ever taught at is we have 4 different criteria that we're working through, and the final one, criteria D for science, is all about like the implications of science in the world. And so it's talking about like the economic implications of science, the health and, you know, the implications on the environment, the implications in politics. And that is something that like is super interesting, but never gets taught explicitly in a science classroom.
My name is Leah Magana. I'm the Director of Learning here at the Jardin Academy. In terms of comparing the IB to public schools, I can really only speak from my own experience. And you know, in the public schools, there's a real focus around content knowledge and skills that can easily be assessed on a standardized test. And so a lot of the teaching ends up being focused around just surface level.
So like through that, like I learned how to cite and like do the APA and MLA citations like when I was in the 6th grade. We started going up to like apply it at a later age. So like by now it's just like really easy.
Right? The science classroom keeps usually to the science, and then we understand that, oh, if there's economic or political implications, like, oh, you can talk about that in history class. But when the kids are working on issues, they bring their own background and their family into these discussions, which is really amazing.
So our teachers are trained, and we are expected actually to respect our students' background in every aspect, their socioeconomic, their culture, their learning differences, and take that and interpret it in our way of designing and delivering the curriculum.
When you get into the IB, because the focus is around conceptual understanding and international mindedness. And so in order to do that, we're not just skill and drilling. It's really slower paced and really working and having students develop and construct understanding around complex issues.
The IB has 10 learning portfolio. One of them, beside the critical thinking, is there's respect, there's communication, there's risk-taking, just to mention a few. And if you look at those like 4 characteristics or the learning profile of the IB, it basically reflects in the classroom.
My name is Shafi, and I'm currently a senior in mechanical engineering at University of Massachusetts. And then 6th grade, I moved to Lahore, Pakistan. That's actually where my parents are from. So they actually moved back, just to, come close to family and that, things like that. School-wise, I honestly didn't really have much of a problem. Oh no, yeah, socially that was like that big jump. That was the only part that I had to overcome.
Hi, my name is Lila. I'm a junior at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, and I'm currently studying in London. I was an international student in my senior year of high school. I lived in Lucerne, Switzerland, and I went to the International School of Zug and Lucerne. It was definitely a little bit of culture shock. There's a stigma around the United States.
Hi, I'm Tim Felton. My freshman year, I spent my 2nd semester studying abroad in Austria at the American International School in Salzburg. Leaving Amherst it's really a bubble. Amherst is, and I feel like we're raised to think that oh, it's not a bubble, we're so inclusive and have all these great things, but we're still raised in such a bubble compared to the rest of the world.
Apparently from my accent, I'm not from here. And the same thing as the school. So the school is very diverse.
If it's in a very homogenous region where people don't the culture isn't very different, you can have a lot of enforcing of a certain ideology in a culture, which isn't necessarily bad, but it makes it more difficult to to maybe adapt to like newer changes. Like for example, you can have like in larger cities, there's a lot more diversity in like larger populations. Schools are a lot more are more capable of adapting to these situations because of the exposure and because of the conversation that's going on. When there isn't an opportunity to have the conversation, then you can't have change, because in the conversation you have disagreement, and through disagreement you have compromise.
Coming from different backgrounds, but we talk about the culture one has within the classroom, and then it's a different culture maybe on the playground. Hawaii has its own culture where it's much more blended. There's a lot more gray area in terms of what is the Hawaii culture.
All of these things that are happening locally have ramifications worldwide and also relate to other things. For example, there's a huge controversy right now on the Big Island with the new 30-meter telescope, the TMT, which has massive implications for science and culture.
All right, Oressa, we're reporting from the Keck Observatory on top of Mauna Kea at 13,800 feet. Here we are beside them. They're big. It is like Mars up here.
People from all over the world that come here. And there's people from all over the world that live here. And we don't really have a lot of, or hold a lot of, very typical American views. Like, you won't find many patriots here. And if they are patriots, they're from the mainland. There are a lot of locals that did get into service, and they might have some patriotism from that, but most people are not cool with the history of what America did here. I think the way Hawaii is currently operating is corrupt and messed up because of America, because of the way America's always run things. You know, it's all about capitalism, and you know, they built Waikiki, and you know, none of that money is really, or a small percentage of that money is really coming back and helping the people, helping the schools.
The international team of astronomers say this is the first visual evidence of the black hole in the center of the M87 galaxy. And the image that made headlines across the world has a local tie. The UMass Amherst research team who worked on the project sat down with me to explain their role in the discovery and what this all means. 8 telescopes that detected this?
There were 8 such telescopes. And the LMT, the Large Millimeter Wavelength Telescope in the country of Mexico, is one of those. It's a 50-meter diameter telescope, which is the world's largest millimeter wave telescope, bar none. And so that's one of the primary telescopes in this Event Horizon Telescope Array. There are 7 other telescopes scattered around the world. Build it on top of these high mountains because you want to be above the Earth's water vapor levels and oxygen levels to be very high, because those molecules in the atmosphere absorb radiation. So we want to be as high as possible.
We needed a telescope the size of the Earth. That being impractical, the scientists used 8 telescopes spread across the globe. They all simultaneously observed M87, and as the Earth rotated, that helped fill in the Earth-sized telescope that they were trying to simulate.
Second report on astronomers' efforts to build a cutting-edge telescope there, and the controversy that's raised with native Hawaiians who regard the area as sacred. It's part of our weekly Leading Edge series.
This is where the heavens meet the earth, and the sacred meets the scientific. They stand in opposition here, amid a long fight to stop construction of the giant 30-meter telescope.
Native communities in many areas are starting to organize and talk about how science does affect local culture and environment and all of that other stuff.
It's sad to see all that happen, but honestly, Mauna Kea gives me hope. I'm not at all against science. I'm all for science. I really think it's awesome to learn about the universe, because I mean the universe is insane. Honestly, if people understood how fucking insane the universe was, your mind would be blown to a scale that you can't even comprehend.
Right.
We're physically here, alive, right here, right now. and yet the universe is like unfathomably like massive. Like you cannot begin to grasp how big it is. Like,
no, it's insanity.
We think Earth is huge. Earth is nothing.
What's amazing is that my 8th graders, for example, can think much more deeply about things like the 30-meter telescope and how, instead of seeing things in black and white and seeing it as like a culture versus science issue, they know that it's so much more to that. And you can't negate the importance of science in Hawaiian culture, and you can't, and vice versa. And you just, even my 8th graders see it in so much more depth and shades of gray than is ever portrayed with us adults.
I thought it was individual. Yeah, then we like together.
Après, pendant les manipulations, si vous voulez, là vous avez un protocole qui est différent. Mais si tu veux aller demander à quelqu'un d'autre qui a le même protocole, etc.
The families and like the community in the school are definitely like tend to be more aware of the are like being like more actively aware of like what they're putting their children through, and so like you get a lot of like feedback that cycles through like pretty actively. Like you can get like dynamic feedback.
Being part of an IB school, collaboration is at the heart of everything we do, and that enables the school to have this really strong learning culture.
The core of the IB, there's a class called TOK, Theory of Knowledge. This is the one that basically teach the students how to think and how to think outside the box.
Why didn't it go like Mao, or why didn't it go like Lenin in terms of a left wing?
Well, there's almost like there's almost bound to be like division within communism as well. It's just like people are more afraid to speak out.
The way we teach different culture is really looking at the different perspectives and one's prior knowledge. So when we there's not that big a leap between the local culture and the international culture because there's so many little mini cultures within our community.
I think in the US, and this is like, you just tend to assume things about people pretty frequently, and like that's something that I think the country needs to work on a lot.
Particularly in international mindedness, the more voices involved are going to lead to a better end product.
A lot of like religious exposure and like cultural exposure, like getting to go like seeing like temples and mosques and churches like within the same day, like, and having like talks with people about like religious studies. Like it's the exposure, especially growing up in a country with like pretty much like a tri-culture, like a native tribe with like Indian, Chinese, and Malay. You have, or Bumiputra, you have like, you get an exposure that makes you have like a tolerance for things.
After, you know, completing my high school from like Lahore, I think the biggest thing that I probably noticed was me being like a little bit more confident and like, you know, talking to people. Because before, like, I usually was like pretty much an introvert, like kind of like closed myself off to a lot of people, kind of enjoyed being alone, that kind of thing.
On the other hand, you can be around students who, or like other classmates who are just more, they're not like really like put through a lot of struggles, for example. I'm not saying this is like the general population, but it definitely does exist. And so you can also have very toxic environments. Society or a school can only really develop as fast as it's capable of, so you can't get angry at something for changing like slowly. Maybe some certain extreme cases should be handled quickly.
A lot of people at international schools speak multiple languages. For me and Liam, like, we were just learning German, and like we didn't know anyone. And it's scary. Like the first like 2 weeks I had no friends, like barely talked to anyone. Like most of the English speakers, like they weren't like coming and going for such a short period of time. They were like established there, so they all spoke German too. German was terrible at that time.
I don't know, I immediately felt like I was at home.
Similar, like I have a lot of friends with just like different nationalities, but we're all in the same school. And just because it's an international school, so the culture is the same, like wherever you go, everyone understands the culture. But just like there's different language, like simple things, like the way you dress, the way you act, like not everyone can keep up with the actual Arab culture.
Uni, I think like after high school, like that was like, you know, like I realized like how much I probably like changed, matured and all that. And I think college sort of helped me with becoming like, I guess, like, you know, like putting myself more out there, I guess.
If people aren't accustomed to having people who are like, I don't know, like being like third cultural kids or like internationally growing kids, and I guess it sucks, but it's still like, I don't know, yeah, everything has its trade-off.
I definitely like would consider working abroad, just because like I've had that experience and like I'll go abroad again. But I was also raised like experience different cultures and kind of just be all around the world.
They already have this foundation of intercultural understanding and empathy for one another that gives them a perspective that really drives their communication of their work to a different level. It's really deep.
From this distant vantage point, the Earth might not seem of any particular interest. But for us, it's different. Consider again that dot. That's here. That's home. That's us. The aggregate of our joy and suffering, thousands of confident religions, ideologies, and economic doctrines, every teacher of morals, every corrupt politician, every superstar, every saint and sinner in the history of our species lived there, on a mote of dust, suspended in a sunbeam. Think of the endless cruelties visited by the inhabitants of one corner of this pixel on the scarcely distinguishable inhabitants of some other corner. How frequent their misunderstandings, how eager they are to kill one another. In our obscurity, in all this vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. There is perhaps no better demonstration of the folly of human conceits than this distant image of our tiny world. To me, it underscores our responsibility to deal more kindly with one another and to preserve and cherish the pale blue dot, the only home we've ever known.